Dear Professor Akhavan, thank you so much for sharing your time with educators and youths around the world who are dedicating their energy, talents, and love to nurture a sense of belonging to one human family. Professor Payam Akhavan is a special advisor on genocide for the International Criminal Court, a human rights lawyer, and professor of international law at the University of Toronto. He is a member of the Permanent Court of Arbitration and was legal advisor for the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. He has also served with the United Nations in Bosnia, Rwanda, Cambodia, Guatemala, and Timor-Leste. He has appeared as counsel before the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice, the European Court of Human Rights, the Supreme Court of Canada, and the Supreme Court of the United States. He also serves as senior advisor to the Ministry of Global Affairs of Canada. Professor Akhavan, you invite us to look at the rise of global justice as a historical process. For most of human history, it has been accepted that the victor can exterminate and enslave the vanquished. Today, however, we don't accept that people should be slaughtered without impunity. You refer to the establishment of the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague in 1899 as a milestone, for instance, in the realization that we can't continue to resolve disputes through war, and the awakening to a vision in which international law and justice will prevail. Until a few decades ago, we didn't have a single jurisdiction to punish genocidal murderers. And today we have the remarkable precedent of the Yugoslav Tribunal, the Rwanda Tribunal, and the establishment more recently in 2002 of the International Criminal Court, when we started having some measure of justice rather than none at all. We also have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which in itself represents a huge moral triumph for humanity. As you show us, a political space has been gradually created for accountability. The transformation of ritual barbarity into an international crime is a civilizational achievement that cannot be taken for granted. But this is not enough. Since 1948, when in the shadow of the Holocaust, the world said never again, we have witnessed over and over humankind's failure to prevent genocide. You tell us that, that we mourn the crimes of the past, but we don't want to connect them to the challenges of the present. Why, you ask? Because we don't want to pay a price for our beliefs. It is easier to just cloak ourselves in the mantle of righteousness without making any sacrifices. It is wonderful to condemn barbarity as long as there is not a price tag attached. In politics, principles are sold to the highest bidder. This political reality, you alert us, is a reflection of the cultural space that we have created, of a materialistic society that worships the dollar. We need to rethink how we can reconcile the consumerist culture of greed and self-absorption with the idea that human dignity should be the foundation of civilization. These two paths, you argue, are fundamentally incompatible. We are not going to achieve human rights if we continue with the current neoliberal order. To build a new society, you call us to go out into the arena of anguish and struggle. Because if we are going to stand up for truth, there is always a price to pay. There is no other way. We have to experience pain. We have to become wounded in the struggle for human rights. And this is actually the best thing that will ever happen to us. You quote the poet Rumi when he says that our wound is where the light enters us. If we are not willing to be wounded, then our soul will remain in darkness. You call us to be spiritual entrepreneurs, aware that if we are not serving our fellow human beings, we are wasting our time. Professor, in your upbringing, what do you believe has contributed to your extension of solidarity to every human being, regardless of their place of birth, ethnicity, or religion?
Thank you very much for your kind invitation. I was brought up in a Baha'i family, and the first things I learned in children's classes in Sunday school was the oneness of humankind, that all human beings belong to the same family. And of course, the consequence of that is that it is our responsibility to be concerned with the welfare of all members of that family. But also beyond that, that our reality is fundamentally spiritual and not material, and that the greatest station to which one can aspire in realizing one's potential is to be of service to humankind. So if you put those two basic ideas together, the oneness of humankind and being of service to humanity, I think it becomes blindingly obvious that we must be, first of all, aware of the condition of the world, and secondly, that we must accept our personal responsibility to make whatever contribution we can to building a better world. So that in simple terms, I think has been the beginning of my journey, although sometimes these ideas are abstractions and they become felt experiences very often through painful moments. And for me, it was in part the violent persecution of the Baha'is beginning after the 1979 revolution, and in particular the arrest and execution of my 16-year-old contemporary, Mona Mahmoudnejad, that made me pause and reflect on whether I should just go about my superficial life in this consumerist culture in North America, worried about my appearance and entertaining and distracting myself, or whether I should, beyond paying lip service to humanity, in fact, dedicate my life to a meaningful engagement. So that, I think, is in brief the answer to your question.
Thank you. And what is the source of your hope and courage to publicly express this universal solidarity, even in the face of criticism and opposition or apathy?
It's a very good question. It's difficult to answer. What is the source of hope? Well, this goes really to the duality of human nature. We have the Manichaean struggle between darkness and light. And in fact, there is a part of our nature which is overwhelmed with grief, with rage, with despair, with all of the emotions that pull us down and eclipse our potential. And then there is our higher, noble, spiritual self, which is based on ideals of compassion, of empathy, of courage, of authenticity. And I think people underestimate the tremendous potential that they have for resilience. And ironically, I've seen that resilience very often among the survivors of the worst crimes, people who've lost everything, but who go on demanding justice. And in fact, I believe the most powerful role models for me have been the Baha'is of Iran, who after almost half a century of violent persecution, being subject to hatred, demonization, being deprived of all of their rights, have never allowed those circumstances to extinguish their sense of hope and optimism about the future. And I would end also by saying that part of the vision that I was brought up with is that humankind is going through, in its collective evolution, a turbulent end to its adolescence with all the divisive ideologies and divisive worldviews which have characterized our past. We are in a transition to what Desjardins called the planetization of humankind, and perhaps beyond human rights and a host of other issues, we look at the issue of climate change, which teaches entirely the inextricable interdependence of all humankind as we struggle to survive on the one planet that allows us to live and to exist. And I mention this because history is on the side of those who embrace the inescapable interdependence of humankind. This is not about naive idealism. In fact, it is about realism. Those who persist in divisive, short-term worldviews are not just following a path which is not morally ideal, but they are on the wrong side of history because their approach is unrealistic. It is not consistent with the trajectory of history. So my hope is not just inspired by spirituality, but it is also inspired by the intellect, by looking at the course of human history and evolution, especially in recent times. And we forget, because we're in the middle of the technology revolution, how radically and how quickly our world has been transformed. The Industrial Revolution in Europe took place over maybe 1.5 centuries, and the tech revolution is barely 20 or 30 years old. So it will be for future historians to look back and see how humankind was forever transformed.
Thank you, Professor Akhavan. And the next question is, how do you think the youth can remain hopeful and practice the courage to extend solidarity to every human being in their daily lives? And I know this ties into the previous question too.
Well, the youth are inheriting the world that we have given them, for better and worse. I think that the youth have legitimate cause for concern about many of the mistakes that have been made in the past, but at the same time, they live in an exceptional period of history, and we should not forget about that amidst the despair and the concern. When it comes to life expectancy, medicine, science, lifespan, the possibilities for instant communication, the kind of instruments that we have now for expressing solidarity were unthinkable even in my generation, let alone in the generation of my parents who are in their 80s and 90s. So you are inheriting the world with many challenges, but also with many opportunities which were unimaginable just a few years ago. But I think the biggest challenge is the neglect of the spiritual dimension of our existence in what is an overwhelmingly materialistic civilization. So very often I feel that there is a desperate longing for a better world, for justice, but sometimes that impulse is not guided by the right spirit and principles. It finds difficulty expressing itself. And one of the things that we have to understand in the age of, TikTok and instant gratification, the idea that, in 30 seconds you can make the world a better place. Well, that's not true. Making the world a better place is a lifetime struggle. It involves sacrifice, it involves pain, and that pain can be a very beautiful experience because it allows us to break the shell of our ego and our illusions and to enter a much more profound and beautiful space where we realize our own potentials. When I come to North America in particular, I see an astonishing degree of despair, anxiety, depression. And most of the work that I do are with poor countries in the global south, where people are really struggling in their daily lives. But for the most part, I think they experience more happiness than we do in our North American bubble. So we have to ask ourselves whether our idea about progress, about the pursuit of happiness, which is largely this consumerist culture, is a great self-deception, which has brought us to the point where we have poisoned our soul and we're poisoning the planet, bringing it to the brink of destruction because of climate change, which has a lot to do with our way of life, our patterns of consumption, our disconnect with nature, with creation, with community. So in a sense, we have this incredible opportunity in terms of the technological, scientific knowledge that we have, but we also need to retrieve the ancient wisdom which comes with spirituality and rediscover it and apply it in the context of this radically new world that your generation will inherit.
Thank you. And how can educators help youth develop a sense of belonging to one human family?
Educators have a very important role to play. I would say that there is a neglect of experiential knowledge in the Western Academy. We are in the tradition of what Max Weber called Occidental rationalism, disenchantment, and one can understand in the European Enlightenment, coming out of the Dark Ages and the fanaticism and superstition of the church, that the idea was that we must get rid of irrational thought and religion and witchcraft and you know what have you in order to make scientific progress. But I think we have thrown the baby out with the bathwater. We've created a world of tremendous material progress, but the spiritual dimension is far, far behind. And what we realize in the era of nuclear weapons, artificial intelligence, or simply the consequences of continuing with our addiction to fossil fuels and the catastrophic consequences it will have on the climate system, that if we do not infuse our technological scientific capabilities with a spiritual dimension, we could just as well self-destruct. So I think that we have to see spirituality in our educational systems, not as something you do on the side in addition to your intellectual learning, but we have to see it as the core of knowledge. And we have to see the spiritualization of society, the development of empathy, meaningful engagement, this deeper reflection as a matter of survival. This is a matter of survival for humankind as a species. So educators have an absolutely central role to play. We need to reimagine entirely the idea that we've had of what education is beyond giving people practical or even scientific or theoretical knowledge. How can we, in a systematic way, not just a random way, in a systematic way, nurture and bring to its full potential those spiritual qualities which ultimately determine whether human beings will use their knowledge for selfish purposes or for the purpose of serving humankind.
Thank you so much, Professor Akhavan, for sharing your time, your beautiful experiences and expertise with us. Really, we really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
You.
Thank you.